After the fire came silence. Not the silence of fear, but the silence of respect. For the first time, the people of Abeji no longer whispered behind Naya's back. They whispered about her strength. They no longer called her cursed. They called her protector. Morning light poured through the roof of Naya's hut. Tammy was grinding herbs, her hands calmer than they'd been in years. Beo sat near the door, his legs stretched out, a bandage across his face. And Naya stood just outside, face lifted to the sun. "I didn't know I could be that strong," she said. Tammy smiled. "Your father, he always said you would be stronger than all of us." "But what was that chant you whispered?" Naya asked. Tammy set down her mortar slowly. "That was the ancient call of the Flame Clan. A bloodline older than kings. When spoken by one of their own, it awakens the deeper fire, the ancestral flame. Not just power, memory." "Memory?" Naya asked. "Yes," Tammy said. "And someone may have heard it." Far north, in a valley of red sand and stone, a cave glowed with ember light. Two robed figures knelt beside a small fire. One raised their head. Their eyes shone orange. "She has awakened," the first said. "The ember child lives." The second nodded. "Send the call. We must bring her home." And the drums began. Quick. Tight. A rhythm carried by fire. Back in Abeji, 3 days later, the village was quiet. Children played near Naya's hut. Elders spoke of rebuilding. Tammy tended to the wounded. Then, 3 riders arrived. Dressed in black and red robes, they wore the golden flame symbol across their chest. They didn't speak as they entered. Naya stepped forward, cautious. One rider dismounted and removed her hood. She was tall. Bald. Her eyes glowed faintly. Her skin was marked with shimmering scars. "Naya, daughter of flame," she said. "We come in the name of the Ember Circle." Beo stepped protectively beside Naya. The rider looked at him and nodded. "You are her shield. But now, she must learn to hold her own sword." Tammy stepped from the hut, eyes wide. "Is it time?" she asked. The rider nodded. "Her fire is known now. Others will come. Not just princes, but hunters, thieves, enemies of the old world. She must be trained." "Where?" Naya asked. The woman pointed to the sky. "Far beyond the desert. Across the stone hills. There lies Emberhold, the last place where flame speaks and listens. You are one of us. And the flame is calling you home." That night, inside the hut, the air was still. "You go," Tammy said softly. "I think I must," Naya replied. "Then I'm going too," Beo added. The rider had said nothing about that. But Naya turned to him. "I want you with me," she said. He smiled faintly. Then it settled. Tammy reached into a clay pot. She pulled out a cloth-wrapped object. It was a bracelet, gold, with a red stone in its center. "Your father left this," she said. "He said you'd wear it when you were ready." Naya took it. As soon as it touched her skin, the stone glowed. And just for a moment, she saw a face. A man. Tall. Eyes glowing. Then it vanished. Her breath caught. "I'll come back," she said. Tammy nodded slowly. "You better. Or I'll burn the desert myself looking for you." They laughed. Then hugged. At dawn, they rode. Naya, Beo, and the 3 riders left Abeji behind. Children waved. Villagers watched in silence. The chief bowed as they passed. At the edge of the village, Naya turned back once. She saw her mother in the distance, hand raised. Then she faced forward. eyes glowing, heart steady. Her journey was just beginning. Power is inherited. Strength is trained. Destiny is chosen. They rode for 7 days. Past the edge of Abeji. Past dry hills and broken trees. Past the world Naya had always known. The riders did not speak much. Only once did the leader, the tall woman with fire in her eyes, speak directly to Naya. She said, "Pain gave you strength. But fire needs control. You are powerful, yes, but wildfire burns everything, even the innocent." Naya said nothing. But the word stayed with her. On the 8th day, just as the sky turned gold and the wind shifted, they saw it. Ember Hold. Built into the side of a dark mountain, hidden behind a curtain of hot mist, Ember Hold was not a place found by accident. The mountain seemed to breathe. The stones hummed with heat. As they approached, the gate opened, not with a sound, but with a wave of warmth that passed through their bones. Inside, there were no guards. Only fire. Fire that moved. Fire that whispered. Fire that felt alive. And then, others. Men. Women. Children. All dressed in red, orange, and black. Some had eyes like Naya's. Others had flames dancing around their fingers. But none of them looked surprised to see her. It was as if they had always been waiting. A short man with a long white beard stepped forward. He bowed his head. Then said, "The Ember Child has returned." Naya opened her mouth to speak, but he raised a hand gently. "Not today," he said. "Tonight, you rest. Tomorrow, you begin." That night, Naya sat near a large pool of still fire. It didn't burn. It didn't smoke. But it glowed like it was listening. Beo sat beside her. He had said nothing since they arrived. Finally, he spoke. "You're home." Naya looked around. Then at the fire. "Maybe," she said. "But it doesn't feel like mine, yet." He smiled. "That's because it's waiting for you to claim it." The next day, the training began. She learned to speak to fire, not command it. She learned to move with it. Breathe with it. Bend it like water. Shape it like clay. She learned that fire had many moods. Quiet. Angry. Hungry. Calm. And each mood responded to a different kind of strength. One day, she failed. Her flame burst too fast and burned the wall of the temple. She fell to her knees, ashamed. But the master only smiled and said, "Good. Fire needs failure to grow." Each day, she became stronger. Not louder. Not brighter. But calmer. She no longer feared her gift. She started listening to it. And slowly, the fire began to listen back. One night, after a long day of training, she sat beside the elder master. He asked her, "Do you know why the prince feared you?" She nodded. "Because he couldn't control me." The elder smiled. "Exactly. And soon, others will try to control you too. But they won't come with swords. They'll come with smiles. Whispers. Promises." Naya looked into the fire. She said, "Then I'll burn the lies before they reach my ears." But the elder shook his head. "No. You'll do something harder. You'll learn to see truth inside the lies. That's the real fire." That night, Naya dreamed of a mountain cracking open. A voice, deep and ancient, called her name from inside the earth. When she woke, she felt a strange pull in her chest. Like something or someone was coming. But it wasn't fear she felt. It was readiness. When fire finds a home, it doesn't sleep. It waits. And watches. And prepares to rise. 2 moons had passed since Naya arrived at Ember Hold. She was no longer the girl from Abeji. She moved like smoke. She burned like memory. She listened to fire like it was her own heartbeat. But strength always calls for test. And not all tests come with warning. One evening, just after training, the elder master called Naya aside. He led her through a narrow tunnel she had never seen before. It was dark, cold, silent. The fire did not follow them. At the end was a stone room. Empty. Except for a large fire circle on the floor. The elder looked at her. And said only this. Enter. And do not lie to the flame. Naya stepped into the circle. The fire rose around her. It didn't burn her skin. It reached deeper into her mind. It touched her memories. Her fears. Her anger. Her past. She saw her father's face. She saw her mother crying in the night. She saw the children who mocked her. The prince who haunted her. She saw Beo. Standing beside her. Always. And then, she saw a shadow. It was tall. Faceless. It stood behind every image. Behind every flame. It whispered without words. She asked it. What do you want? It didn't speak. But she felt it in her chest. Not fire. Cold. Sudden. Ancient. Watching. She stepped closer. The shadow didn't move. But it grew. Wider. Darker. Until it swallowed the fire. Then she heard a voice. It wasn't hers. It wasn't the elder's. And it wasn't the flame. It said. The girl with fire eyes will bring the final burning. She must not rise. And then, it was gone. Naya dropped to her knees. Breathless. The elder entered the circle and placed a hand on her shoulder. She looked up. What was that? His face was calm. But sorrow lived in his eyes. That, he said, was the old enemy. The one who broke your father's people. The one who haunts all fire. Naya stood slowly. Why now? Because now, it sees you. That night, Naya sat beside the pool of quiet flame. The glow soft. The night still. Beo joined her. She told him everything. He listened. Silent. Still. Then he said. You're not alone. She nodded. But I feel like I am. He took her hand. Then I'll stay close enough to remind you. She turned to him. Smiled. Just a little. The next day, word came to Ember Hold. A royal messenger. Dressed in gold and fear. The king of the 7 kingdoms was summoning the fire clans. Something dark had stirred in the eastern lands. Villages were disappearing. Flames refused to burn. Even light would not stay. And in the center of it, the same shadow Naya had seen in the fire circle. The elders held council. Some argued to wait. Others feared another purge. But the elder master stood. We must go. Then he turned to Naya. You will stand before the king. And show the world that fire has not fallen. When shadows stretch, only fire can draw the line. And only the bold will stand on it. At sunrise, Naya stood at the gates of Ember Hold. The wind was still. The air warm. She wore a long robe, deep red, lined with gold. Not because she wanted to look like royalty. But because this time, she would be standing among them. The elder master handed her a carved staff. It wasn't made of wood. It was flame, shaped into form. Cooled with ash and memory. The kings will try to test you, he said. Do not answer with pride. Answer with truth. Beo stood beside her. Dressed simply. He carried no fire. But in his eyes, There was more courage than most soldiers ever find in battle. And so they rode. Across wide plains. Through silver rivers. Past cities with tall walls and banners that did not welcome strangers. Until finally, they reached the heart of the 7 kingdoms. The royal court. It was not just one palace. It was 7 towers, each built by a different ruler. Joined at the center by a stone hall where all kings met. As Naya entered, guards stared. Some whispered her name. Others stared at her eyes. She said nothing. Inside the court, kings and queens waited on thrones made of bone, wood, stone, and steel. Each throne told its own story. Each ruler carried their own fear. All eyes turned to her as she entered. A voice rose. Old. Cold. Sharp. So, this is the girl of fire. It was King Oloru, ruler of the Ice Kingdom in the north. His skin pale. His eyes like frost. He hated flame. I have heard you burned your village, he said. Naya stood still. I saved it, she replied. With a gift I didn't ask for, but refused to waste. Queen Luma of the Western Sands leaned forward. The east is falling. Villages gone. Children taken. The sky black for days. And your people, she said slowly. Once faced this darkness, did they not? Naya nodded. My father's people, the Flame Clan, were haunted. Not by men. But by shadow. And now, the shadow is rising again. A hush fell across the room. Then King Duma of the Southern Hills spoke. And what would you have us do? Naya looked at them. All of them. Their crowns. Their pride. Their fear. You build towers to protect yourselves, she said. But the shadow does not knock. It seeps in. You waited last time. And it cost the fire clans everything. Don't wait again. Then she raised her staff. And in silence, the flame rose from the stone floor. It didn't burn. It danced. And from within the flame, they saw something. The shadow. Wide. Crawling. Full of teeth and silence. And they saw Naya. Standing in front of it. Alone. Then the vision faded. No one spoke. Not for a long time. Then Queen Luma stood. Let it be written, she said. The girl of fire shall lead the front line. With warriors from all 7 kingdoms beside her. Let the flame rise again. Beo exhaled quietly. Naya lowered her staff. The king of the ice realm turned his face. But he said no more. That night, Naya sat alone in the royal garden. She did not smile. She did not cry. She only looked at the sky. And whispered. Father. If you see me now. Guide me. Because what's coming will burn more than kingdoms. Power can bring fear. But truth brings unity. And sometimes, the smallest flame lights the path for many. The army gathered. From all 7 kingdoms, they came. Warriors in gold, steel, feathers, and bone. Marching not under a single flag. But under the symbol of fire. Not just for Naya. But because the darkness in the east did not care who ruled. Only who remained. They camped at the borderlands. Where the green hills ended. And the black stone began. It was a cursed place. No bird sang. No wind moved. Even the fire at night burned low. Still, the soldiers trained. They sharpened blades. Studied maps. Told old stories to keep fear away. But the closer they got to the dark lands, the more men left their tents at night and never returned. At first, they blamed wild animals. Then spies. But Naya knew better. This was not war by blade. This was war by fear. And fear had already started feeding. One evening, Naya stood alone on a hill. The stars were hidden. The moon refused to rise. She held her staff tight and whispered the old chant her mother had taught her. The flame appeared, small, quiet, but warm. Behind her, Beo stepped forward. She smiled faintly. He had been distant lately. Quiet. Tired. She thought it was fear. She never thought it was something else. He sat beside her. She asked, "Do you think we'll survive this?" He replied, "Some of us." Then he looked at her. "Are serious? Naya, if something happens to me?" She shook her head. "Don't say that." But he continued, "If something happens, don't lose your fire. Don't let grief be your shadow." She nodded slowly. "I won't." But her heart was already uneasy. That night, Naya dreamed again. But this time, the fire showed her something new. She saw Beo, standing in a circle of black stones. He was not himself. His eyes were pale. His voice was not his own. He said only one word. "Chosen." She woke up, sweating. The fire around her had gone cold. The next day, the camp was silent. One of the southern generals had vanished. Another soldier was found with eyes open, mouth wide. Heart stopped. The elder master came to Naya's tent. His face grave. "I read the signs," he said. "The enemy is close. But not above ground." She asked, "Then where?" He replied, "Among us." That night, she watched everyone. But one person stood out. Beo. He avoided her eyes. He didn't eat. He didn't speak. When she approached, he forced a smile. But it wasn't his. She remembered something her mother once said. Not every shadow comes with night. Some walk in daylight, wearing your friend's face. So she tested him. She asked about a day they spent in Abeji. The day by the stream. The fish. The red scarf. He laughed. But said the wrong color. She froze. Then asked again. Softly. "What is my father's name?" He looked confused. Then angry. Then still. And then, his voice changed. Not his voice. Something deeper. It said, "You burned my watchers. You broke my seal. But you can't burn me." He lunged. But Naya was faster. She raised her staff. And flame burst from the earth. It wrapped him in light. He screamed. But it wasn't pain. It was living. And when it was done, Beo collapsed. Unconscious. Breathing. Alive. Whatever had been inside him was gone. She held him, rocked him like a child, and whispered, "You came back." But deep in her chest, she now knew. This war would not just take strangers. It would come for everything she loved. A shadow's sharpest weapon is the face it steals. But even in the deepest lie, love leaves a mark. The flame that never dies. The sun did not rise the day they entered the Shadowlands. It tried. But the sky remained a sheet of ash. The army moved like ghosts. Each step forward felt like a step toward something final. At the center of the dead land stood the tower. Crooked. Black. Waiting. Naya walked at the front, her staff glowing faintly. Beo was beside her, his hand tight around the hilt of his short blade. Neither spoke. They didn't need to. They knew what waited ahead. Would not let both of them walk back. When they reached the open plain, the tower began to breathe. Not with air, but with shadows. It released them slowly, creatures shaped like humans, but with no skin, no eyes, only long fingers and open mouths. The army fought hard. Flame against fog, steel against crawling dark. But the tower held more than creatures. It held a presence, a voice. And now, it spoke. Not from the top, from the ground beneath them. It whispered through the stones. You have brought fire to die, and now it shall be buried. Naya raised her staff. The flame rose with her. But this time, she did not strike. She walked straight toward the tower. Baal turned to go with her. But she stopped him. Not this time. He froze. He knew. She reached the base of the tower alone. There was no door. Only a wall of living shadow, pulsing like a heartbeat. She stepped into it. And it let her pass. Inside, silence. No screams. No light. Only the voice. You were born from my ashes, it said. You carry stolen flame. You were never meant to rise. Naya closed her eyes. She whispered the chant her mother had given her. And her father's blood answered. A fire unlike any before burst from her chest. Golden, not red. Calm, not wild. It did not burn the tower. It revealed it. The shadow was not a creature. It was fear. Years of fear. Generations of silence. The fire didn't destroy it with rage. It ended it with truth. It said, I am not yours. I am not cursed. I am chosen. And the tower cracked. Light poured from the broken stones. The shadow tried to scream. But the flame silenced it. And the tower fell. When the dust cleared, the plain was empty. And at the center of it, Naya stood. Alive. The army watched in silence. Then they dropped to one knee. Not because she was a queen. Not because she had power. But because she had walked into death. And walked back carrying light. Baal ran to her. Bruised. Limping. He held her. Tighter than ever. You did it, he whispered. No, she replied. We did. In the years that followed, songs were written. Children born with fire in their eyes were no longer feared. They were celebrated. And when people told the story of the day the shadow died, they always ended with the same words. The girl with the flame eyes never burned others to be seen. She burned the darkness, so others could finally see. Some are born with fire. Others carry it forward. But the brightest flame is the one that leaves light behind. But tell me something. If it were you, if you had fire in your hands, would you use it to protect, to fight, to heal? Or would you be afraid of what it might become? Let me know in the comments. What would you have done in Naya's place? And if you've been following this story since chapter 1, thank you for walking through the fire with her. Her journey may be complete, but more legends are rising. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next one. A new story is already on its way. Till then, keep the flame alive.